Coronation presents Firebreaker, The Legend of George and the Dragon, Chapter 8, The Swamp Sacrifice.
But Grandfather, how would George save the princess if he's locked up in the tower?
Yes. Well, this is where the story gets really good. Here, I made you some popcorn.
Yummy.
High in the tower prison, George paced back and forth, examining every inch of his cell.
There must be a weakness in here somewhere.
It's no use, George. I've looked everywhere.
Just then, the door opened and 4 cultists let in Zoe, Nico, and the other resistance members.
Zoe!
Put them all in the big cell together. Hurry up!
Cappadocian, I think your horse is smarter than you.
What?
Move along! Move it along, you!
Your Majesty, forgive me. We did what we could.
Peace, my dear. Peace.
Quiet down, all of you!
As the cultists were leaving, the leader addressed the youngest.
Timothy, hurry up. Get them water, then meet us downstairs in the square. It's time.
Yes, sir.
The guard hastily splashed some water into bowls and slid them under the bars of each cell. As he came to the king's cell, Cosmo looked at him tenderly.
Timothy.
The guard stopped and stared at the floor. All the other prisoners watched in silence.
Timothy, your father was captain of my guard for many years. I remember your baptism. He was so happy that day. He trained you himself, did he not? Why, I remember...
No, it's no use, Your Majesty.
The young guard looked up at the king.
That was then. Now, he's gone.
Hurry up, boy!
Timothy crossed to the tower door, the ring of keys rattling on his belt.
Son, I beg you, remember your people, remember your father.
Timothy paused for a moment, his eyes searching back and forth. Then he closed his eyes tightly, stepped out of the tower, and shut the door behind him.
That's it then. All is lost.
The king turned and faced his subjects.
What kind of king have I been that I allowed all this to happen? Oh, forgive me.
No, Your Majesty. Do not despair. You have been given a chance to redeem yourself.
Cosmo considered George a moment and nodded.
Perhaps. Even now, in our darkest hour, we must be still. We can do nothing by ourselves.
Cosmo clasped his hands together slowly. In the old man's face, George saw a kingly strength still. Looking down at his own hands, George did the same and looked out the window at the square below. Plisto knew that Princess Aia was the last thread of resistance in the city. She wasn't any ordinary dragon meal. She wasn't a pauper boy, a handmaiden, or a commoner. She was the princess. If she could be broken, if she could join them, then Kakos would rule Silene forever, unchallenged. Beneath his mask, the dragon worshiper smiled. She could be Plisto's dark bride, and the two of them could stand united as emissaries of the dragon. In the darkness of his heart, Plisto yearned for this. He imagined how fine Aia would look in black robes, how becoming she would be behind a mask. He walked up to her, still chained in the city square. Slowly, he removed his mask, revealing his true face, scaly and contorted by the dragon's power. A once great, handsome, and wise man, now a hideous creature. He spoke calmly, enticingly.
Kakos the Merciful allows you one final chance. It is quite simple. If you but worship him,
You shall live. What say you, Princess Aia?
The defiant princess looked at the disgusting crowd of cultists, then up at the palace tower, and finally into Plisto's scaly face.
Never. You lie, as does your master. But even if I believed you, I still would not forsake the god of my fathers.
Plisto slithered up to her face, fuming wet breath through his gritted teeth.
Be gone, serpent!
Back in the stable, Michael was growing restless. A strange, ghostly figure, barely visible to the eye, passed through the stable to Michael. All the horses turned their heads.
George needs you.
In a moment, the ghostly figure was gone, and all the doors of the stable were opened. As Michael reared up to his full height, the horses charged out of the gate and into the city streets. Plisto led Princess Aia in chains through the streets of Silene. People watched fearfully from inside their doorsteps and behind their windows, some jeering at her, some cheering, some weeping.
In the name of God, stop!
From a rooftop, a little girl tossed flower petals, crying, into her mother's shoulder. Suddenly, an old man stepped out into the street.
Stop this madness! In the name of God, stop! Get out of the way, old man! The Cappadocian has come to save us! Stop this madness before it is too late, Plisto! Stop, I say!
A guard knocked the old man to the ground. The procession continued.
You will be judged, Plisto! May God have mercy on your soul!
The cultists arrived at Kakos Lake. The swampy water was filthy. Slime, algae, and noxious fumes carpeted the surface. The stench of death filled the air. Wistfully, Aya's mind turned to the days before Kakos, to when she was a little girl and would walk along the shore with her mother and father. Birds used to sing here. The water was crystal. People would fish and feast and swim, and now it was corrupted. A cesspit of decay and sorrow. How could something so pure and beautiful become so lost? They chained Aya to a post on a dock at the edge of the water.
Your last chance, my lady.
Aya looked out at the water, then, with a deep breath, turned back to Plisto, almost smiling.
Never.
Very well, my lady. But if I may offer some advice, don't make this more difficult than it needs to be. Kakos will be quite hungry.
You can bet I won't be going down easy.
Let us call forth our great lord!
He raised his scaly arms out towards the lake and began an incantation to summon the dragon.
Draco mihi dux, sit dominus meus Draco. Draco mihi dux, sit dominus meus Draco.
Back in the city, Michael and the Silenian horses burst into the square below the tower, trampling every cultist that stood in their way. The young guard, Timothy, was terrified by the swirling circle of horses, who rode in unison and closed in around him as if they were being driven by invisible riders. Suddenly, Michael came face to face with the young guard. The horse stared down at him. The boy raised his hands in peace, then carefully placed the ring of prison keys at Michael's feet. In the tower, George continued to scour his prison cell, contemplating an escape.
If we were to put enough pressure across this beam, we might be able to break.
Michael burst through the prison door, the keys dangling from his mouth. He tossed them at George's feet.
Good boy.
What do we do now, George?
George looked at the small group in front of him, the king, Demetrius, and the resistance fighters.
Find the guards' weapons. Arm yourselves. You five and Demetrius, stay at the palace and protect the king.
Yes, sir.
Zoe and the others, take the horses. Secure the city. Tell the people that hope is not lost.
Very good, Cappadocian.
What about you, George?
Dragon.
Right.
God be with you, George.
For Silene!
Oh, Silene!
George and the others entered the armory. They began picking up weapons while George looked around for...
Ascalon.
George picked up a more familiar weapon, his Roman short sword.
Yeah, just in case.
As Plisto and the cultists returned to the city, Aia tried desperately to free herself from the chains.
Come on.
The water began to churn and boil. The princess looked nervously across the lake. A putrid steam crept across the dark water, and there, in the middle of the lake, the dragon emerged, dripping with filth. He slowly moved across the water toward her. He towered above her, small flames escaping from his flared nostrils. Her face white with fear, Aia caught her breath and looked up at the hideous creature.
Don't tell me. Kakos, right?
The dragon stared down at her for what seemed to her an eternity, and then slowly opened its massive jaws. The stench was overwhelming, but gently, softly, a beautiful, low, pulsating sound came forth, relaxing Aya's ears, reverberating through her mind. Her eyes closed slowly, and then he spoke.
Aia, long have I desired thee. Thou art fair, thou art wise. Such strength I see in thy sweet eyes.
Aia fought with all her might against the dragon's wiles.
No. You are evil itself.
The cultists, returning from the lake, stood just inside the gates.
Oi, what's that?
George, holding Ascalon aloft, was galloping towards the city gates at breakneck speed.
It's over, Cappadocian! Kakos will have his sacrifice!
He's not slowing down.
Hold your ground, fools!
George and Michael burst through the cultists, knocking them all out and heading toward the lake.
Get back. Get away from me.
Dear lady, beautiful lady, why dost thou struggle so? Peace I offer thee, rest sublime in the warm depths here below.
The dragon's throat started glowing.
No. You're a liar.
The struggle was too much for Aia. She began to slip into a daze.
Thy people reproach thee, thy king loves thee not, reviled, deserted, alone.
But out of the corner of her eye, in the distance,
George!
Come with me now. Warmth down below awaits thee, fair goddess. Thy throne.
Kakos opened his mouth and moved towards her. George arrived not a moment too soon, charging into the shallows of the lake on Michael's back. As he galloped towards the princess, George saw the abominable creature. His mind raced. He remembered Cappadocia, his parents, the fire. Hate filled every fiber of his being. This was it. This was his moment. This was revenge. George drew his sword and struck at the dragon's throat. The blow shattered the sword and threw him off Michael's back. With a swipe of his wing, he sent Michael tumbling away. George burned red hot. He grabbed Ascalon with all his might, and again, it was so heavy he could barely lift it, struggling and straining under its weight. He tried to wield it, but it was too late. Kakos caught the spear in his teeth and flung it far out into the lake.
Oh no.
The dragon raised himself even higher and looked down on George.
Silly Cappadocian. Shall we go for a little swim?
And with that, Kakos grabbed George and disappeared with him under the murky water.
George!
As they descended, George's anger gave way to fear. The marshy water swirled around him. His vision began to tunnel, and his mind felt woozy. He felt once again like that little boy in Cappadocia, caught in the dragon's gaze, helpless, paralyzed, weak, about to lose everything.
Next time on Firebreaker.
As Princess Aia scanned the surface of the Black Lake for any sign of George or the dragon, she attempted to pick her shackles with a hairpin she had concealed in her sleeve.
May the Holy Cross be my light. May the dragon never be my overlord.
You have been listening to Firebreaker, the legend of George and the Dragon. Firebreaker is a Coronation Media production, starring David Henrie and Elizabeth Tabish. Directed by Jim Morlino. Written by Jim Morlino and Dominic Morlino. Original score by Kevin Kasker. With sound design by Michael Moen. Executive producer, Bill Phillips. Executive producer and showrunner, Gary Gores. For a full cast and crew listing, please visit our website, firebreakerseries.com.